Hey, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. Have you ever dreamed of dropping out of the rat race and moving to a tropical paradise? This week's guest actually did it. If you've ever struggled through an 80-hour work week, you know it can be incredibly profitable, but at what cost to your health, happiness, and family life? How do you know when enough is enough? Today we're here with fellow OG podcaster and host of the hit show Entrepreneurs on Fire, my friend John Lee Dumas. After years working 60 to 80 hours a week living in San Diego, JLD made the life-changing decision to revamp his business and move his family to Puerto Rico, where he now works just 20 or 30 hours a week, kicking back in a Caribbean paradise. And get this, after more than a decade of podcasting, JLD has recorded more than 4,500 podcast interviews with some of the top minds in business. And so he has the unique ability to tap into the pulse of what it really means to be a successful entrepreneur and someone who's successful in business and in life for the long term. In this episode, you're about to hear how John reduced his work week from 80 hours to around 20 hours. Doesn't that sound nice? How to achieve longevity in podcasting, business, and life. How to adapt to the AI revolution. How to find financial freedom by defining your enough, and much more. Let's go hang out with John. Welcome back, folks. Today we're here with our friend, the one and only John Lee Dumas, host of the hit OG podcast, Entrepreneurs on Fire. Over the past 12 years, JLD has interviewed over 4,000 entrepreneurs, and he's just getting warmed up. In fact, right before we started recording, he told me that he has done now 4,491 interviews, not including all of the other interviews on other people's shows like this one. So kudos to you for leading the charge, John. Thanks so much for being here.
Abel, I'm fired up. We're just a couple New England boys who are trying to make good in this world, doing everything that we can. And we've, fled that part of the country to a warmer climate. You in Austin, myself in Puerto Rico for 8 years now. And brother, I'll never leave.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like you've just found a comfy spot in paradise, but your journey to get there has been a long and windy one. And a lot of people might not be, because I can even hear it in your voice now. I've been really impressed by your trajectory over the years, because especially coming out of the gate, we started our podcast around the same time, and you were going hard, recording all the time. And not to put words in your mouth or whatever, but just, from the outside watching what you've done with your life and your career, it's been really inspiring because lots of success, working super hard, and then lots of kind of taking a step back, reevaluating, tapping the brakes, and changing your entire life for you and your family in what seems to be a really, really positive direction. And I can even hear it in your voice in the times that we've interacted in the past few years compared to when we first did, 10 plus years ago. You're much more relaxed and much more, it just seems like you can hear it in someone's voice when they're living a life that's aligned with what they should be. And it seems like you're a fundamental example of that. So I just want to give you a quick tip of the hat.
Well, listen, I appreciate that. I received that. One thing that I have come to realize in the 44 years now that I've been on this planet, from my time in the military to corporate finance to commercial real estate to law school to being an entrepreneur in the podcasting space, is that, we're all in some ways living quiet lives of desperation. Mm-hmm. And that may sound sad, or that may sound a little scary or morbid, but listen, that's just kind of how humans are programmed. We're kind of programmed to just say, hey, what is the biggest problem that I have right now? How can I fix that problem? And then go on down the food chain. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like once we got shelter taken care of, once we have food taken care of, then we just kind of keep going down the problem issue. Now it's like, my Tesla Powerwall isn't, collecting enough sun energy every day to, power my house. And so, it's just kind of crazy how this thing goes. And I like having that kind of mentality because to me, it allows every interaction you have with somebody to just say, you know what, that individual, they're trying. Life is hard and they're trying hard. They have friends, family, loved ones. They have health. They have struggles, financial, all these different things. And at this moment, they may be living a very quiet life of desperation because we don't know that. We don't need to specifically know that, but we do need to give them grace to say, hey, like what's going on in your world, or just let them do what they need to do to figure things out. And when we were talking about 12 years ago, that, as you were mentioning, I was in the quiet place of desperation, as every entrepreneur is when they're first starting out on their journey. You're clueless. You don't know if this is going to work. You're working so hard, blood, sweat, and tears. You're just desperately scared of it working. You're desperately scared of it failing. You don't know what to do. And, sometimes, someday it works out and you can start making different choices, which is kind of what you were referring to. And we have made those choices over the last 12 years, specifically the last 5 or 6 years, to kind of do what we want to do in life and in business. And, maybe we get into that later on in the episode, but I'm excited to have that conversation.
Well, I'd love to because, especially the longer that I do this podcast, health was kind of the starting point, but you can't talk about health without talking about the health of your finances or your business or how hard you're working or other things. So like the longer I do this show, the more people I talk to, the more I see those connections between these different aspects of life. It's easier and kind of convenient to say that, oh, my health is nailed or I totally have that dialed in. But if you don't have that other aspect of your life under control, then ultimately it will affect your health and come back to all these things. Same thing with business. If you go way too far down the road of overworking, and we've seen this play out many times with folks, sometimes your relationships suffer. Sometimes your health itself starts circling the drain. And so anyway, when I see folks like you who have crushed it from a business side of things and also made major adjustments in service of your own family, in service of your own, time on earth, and valuing that as highly as you could. I think I've heard you say that you were working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week in years past, and now it's more like 20, 30. So what is that like, and why did you decide to kind of make some of those fundamental changes?
I think one of the critical things that we can do as entrepreneurs is very consistently take a pulse on our life, on how we feel about our business. Like really sit down with yourself in quiet times. And this is why a lot of people, I know you've mentioned it before, and I'm big on it as well, talk about meditation, talk about journaling, talk about quiet time, because these are all critical times and places where we can really say, you know what, the world is crazy, it's busy, it's asking me to do a million things, but how do I really feel right now about my business, about my finances, about my health? Ask yourself the tough questions in a private place where it's just you, where you can hopefully get a great and meaningful answer, and keep that finger on the pulse, because things will change and evolve over time. And I did a bad job of that, like really the first 6 to 7 years of my business, because I was in total grind mode. I was just building, building, building. And I finally came up for breath at one point due to some great advice from mentors that I have, and did just those type of things. And what I kind of what was the result of that was me looking in the mirror and saying, I'm actually not really running the business that I want to be running. I have 13 employees. I'm spending a lot of my days managing those employees.
Mhm.
My monthly salary expenses are pretty huge, which is making me do a lot of other products and services and launches that I might not otherwise want to do. What would it look like if I just simplified things? If I said, you know what, I'm going to give up potentially top line gross revenue, and I'm going to focus on what's a number that's really going to make me happy. What's a number, and this is a key word we'll probably come back to a couple times, Abel.
Mhm.
What's a number that's enough? And that's something that so few entrepreneurs ever recognize, ever think about. What is enough? And I got that number for me. And it really did help, by the way, that I live in Puerto Rico. We don't pay any federal tax. We pay no state tax. We pay a flat 4% tax. So we get to keep the money that we make. So Puerto Rico gave me the opportunity to really get to that number quickly, where I said, what is enough of me making this gross revenue? Because now I can keep this net revenue and I'm paying essentially no money in taxes. So I'm at my number without having to, really sacrifice the things I don't want to sacrifice to stay at that number. Like it was such an amazing opportunity. So over, I'd say the next 7 years, and it wasn't immediate. We did start making changes immediately, but over time, what was happening is we were taking our business from 13 employees, was taking up a lot of my time managing, a lot of course launches and product launches and masterminds and events that I might not otherwise have done, just to kind of make enough money to pay the business to make sure that it could keep functioning. To we're sitting here today, it's myself and Kate. and 2 virtual assistants. That is our entire business. Now, again, we did not get there overnight. We got there over 7 years of intentional decisions, slowly closing down and sunsetting things and projects and products and courses and et cetera. And then getting to a point a few years ago, because we've been here now for a few years at this place, where we're at 2 virtual assistants, myself, my wife, and we're running a thriving multi-million dollar net profit a year business. Net profit meaning after taxes too, here in Puerto Rico, and loving life as a result, because we were very intentional about taking that pulse. Now, again, was I there in 2012 and 2014 and 2018? No. Was I getting there in 2020? Yes. Am I now here in 2024? Yes. But it all stemmed from me actually knowing what my enough was, where I actually wanted the goalpost to be. And that's a very hard decision for a lot of people. And I'll tell you one thing about running a show 7 days a week where I interview the world's most successful entrepreneurs is you learn from those entrepreneurs, and their biggest failures are doing exactly what I was doing, just growing, growing, growing with no real plan in mind. So that to me was such a revelation. And I like to share that story because I think there's a lot of people out there that could start moving in that direction if that feels right for them. But guess what, Abel? There's the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world, the Elon Musks of the world. They should never take my path because they would be bored. Man, if they had to spend a day in my shoes, they would kill themselves of boredom. It's not for everybody. There's people that should be crushing it and grinding their faces off 100%. There's some people that should be 70%. There's some people that should be 30%. You've got to find what it is for you that makes you happy, fulfilled, thriving, and just overall in your right vibe and energy, and go for that.
And it can be a moving target, right? Even for you. I mean, no one needs to tell you that you've put in the work, whether it was in the military in that previous career or the world of podcasting. You've earned it.
Let me touch on that moving target real quick, because it's such a key piece that we need to really make sure that we talk about, because it's so true. Because guess what? For the past 4 years now, like I mentioned, I've been at that place. And, now I just had my son a year ago. He's almost a year old. And I'm kind of getting itchy now where I'm like, you know what? Kate's kind of transitioning into mom mode. Like, I'm thinking, man, what could be next business wise? Because I've got a lot of things locked in the other scenarios. So I might be opening another chapter in my life. Who knows? In the next X number of, fill in the blank months, years, or whatever. And that, who knows what that looks like? But that next chapter, that next series, that next series of my life, that could be a whole new chapter where I'm doing something different. But it always is going back to, let me really feel my pulse and make sure that, these feelings that I'm having aren't just 1, 2, 3 times, but are consistent over days, weeks, months.
You got to wait for that itch sometimes, right? Like it'll get away from you. If we all are guilty of burning out at some point, or just kind of burning the candle at both ends, and taking that step back is so important, because I can echo that. It's been really interesting kind of coming up many years ago now with folks who have scaled their businesses to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, unicorns in the billion-dollar territory. And it's been so interesting to kind of witness the sacrifices that in some cases were made to get there, whether it was in their own relationships or what their business stood for, or, their own personal health. We kind of worship the idea of scaling, especially as early entrepreneurs. But you spend a few years there and you start to realize that like our time on earth is a lot more precious than many of us might realize. And I think you kind of got that message very early in your career. Maybe you can share a little bit of that, because I mean, I was tearing up when I read your book, to be honest. Your background is so powerful, and the experience is so important, I think, to share with others. But let me just share a couple lines here. You made a promise to yourself. You promised you would never settle for a life that lacked fulfillment, never give up the pursuit of happiness. You promised that you would live a life worth living, of service, of gratitude, and a lot of these other things. So what brought you to that conclusion, and how do you value that now? How has that changed the rest of your life?
Well, those are a lot of pretty words, and anybody can really write pretty words, and maybe they mean it, maybe they don't. But what really brought me to that moment, and which made it super real for me, was, that was during a deployment to Iraq, where I was an Army officer in charge of 4 tanks, 16 men, in a time of war, in a time of battle. And, of those 16 men that I was deployed with, that I was the tank commander of, I was their platoon leader, I was in charge of bringing them home. 4 made the ultimate sacrifice and they never returned home. And it was such like a emotional moment for me to know that I'd failed in that capacity. And at the same time, I was not going to fail going forward by not honoring the sacrifice that they had made. And I just, in that moment, committed that, I'm not going to live a life less than I'm capable of living. And whenever I felt like quitting or stopping to work or doing any number of things, especially in those early days when I had no success, when I had no traction, when I had no knowledge of if this was going to work, I would bring myself back there and say, like, hey, I'm sitting here in Portland, Maine, like interviewing entrepreneurs, and I'm going to complain, or I'm going to, be afraid of continuing on this fight that I've decided to equip myself with when it comes to launching a successful business podcast, interviewing the world's most successful entrepreneurs 7 days a week. And the answer was no, I'm not going to give up this fight. I'm not going to quit. I owe it to the men who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And I'm going to, uphold that promise. And to this day, I still go back to that promise that I made when certain scenarios arise, when, something terrible happens in the world, to me or to a loved one, of course you want to react in the correct way, but at the same time, you need perspective of like, okay, in the big scheme of things, is the fact that my stovetop burned out last night, while we were cooking dinner, which by the way is a true story. It's out now. Like it's out of my kitchen and it's annoying, but I'm like, all right, John, take a deep breath, relax. In a week, it's going to be fixed. It's going to be replaced. Like, let's keep some perspective here, because it's the little things in life that can wear you down and break people if you let it. But if you don't take that time to have gratitude, space, meditation, just with you, journaling, then these things can really pile up over time and take you down.
I've heard you talk about, a lot of people say, well, you probably got discipline from the military, all these things. I know you have, a response to that, but I am curious for, normal citizens who don't have that sort of training and experience. Are there other aspects that you do bring to your life, whether it's perspective or habits or anything like that, that regular Joes and Janes might be able to learn from?
I will say there's a lot of things that I'm committed to. Movement is one of those things. So I have a dog. He's a 75-pound golden doodle. And I love the fact that every single morning I'm getting a wet nuzzle from him at about 5:30 a.m. I'm an early riser and I like to be an early riser because I go to bed early as well. And I know that I have a 3-mile hike that I'm about to take him on because he's an active dog and he needs it. So, there's no like battling with my own self about, do I get out and get some movement in today? It's already locked in. And so I just have this process where there's no questions, no excuses. I get out of bed, put the leash on. We're out for a 3-mile walk, which is close to an hour at times. And during that time, I'm using it wisely. I'm consuming content on topics that I love, that I want to learn more about, whether that be AI or investments or nutrition or whatever it might be. I'm utilizing that time as well while I'm hiking outdoors with my dog, taking in the blue sky as as the sun's rising, and breathing in the fresh air that's blowing in off the Caribbean, and being grateful for that as well, and sweating and moving and making all that happen. And that's that's the cornerstone of my day. Like, that's the start, because then it just flows into the other things that I have as non-negotiables. And I won't get overly detailed because some people might find it boring, but I mean, I will tell you that, like, strength training, stretching, red light therapy, cold plunge, infrared saunas, all of these things are involved with that, because I know that if I'm not healthy, if I'm not feeling vibrant and energetic, then guess what? No matter how financially successful I am, I'm not going to be able to enjoy it to the degree, to the level that I want to, or I'm not going to be able to achieve the type of success that I want to. So that's my priority number one when I'm waking up in the morning, is making sure I'm taking care of that side of things, because then the rest of the day, when I maybe get caught up in some kind of work or business situation, I've already checked that block. And it's just a great way for me to say, you know what? I'd love to get a walk in later this evening. And I usually do, by the way. But if I don't, because of any number of things, that's okay because I've already checked those blocks.
I love that. What about, to go back earlier in the conversation, defining enough? How did you get there? And what are the things that you valued that you wanted to be like taking care? Because it's unlimited, right? Like if you had billions of dollars, you could be rocketing to the moon and building spaceships or whatever. But, anything less than that, do you have to crush your dreams? Do you have to abandon something? How did you value those sorts of things as you were coming up with your decision?
So I won't take full credit for that kind of concept. It was actually, one of my past guests. Because again, this is why I love doing what I do, because I'm speaking every single day to brilliant, successful, inspiring, motivating entrepreneurs, and I'm learning so much from them. And one of them years ago told a story, and the story went something along the lines of like, this very famous artist was having an art exhibition, and he loved his paintings, and he was lauded for his amazing artistic work, and he was very successful in his own right. And so he was at his opening for his art gallery, and he's talking to this one guy, and suddenly the guy's like, "Shh, listen, you know who just walked in? That guy that just walked in is one of the richest men in the world. Like he could buy all of your art, and you'll never be able to make as much money as him doing what you do." And then the artist looked back at that guy and said, well, I have one thing that he'll never have. And the guy's like, "What are you talking about? He's like the richest man in the world. He has everything." And the artist said, "I have enough." And essentially what he meant was, A, he has enough. B, he loves what he does. He's satisfied with what he does. And you could just tell by looking at that individual that that person would never have enough. Like they're just so ambitious, so overly needing the next and the next and the next. And they're going to probably look up one day, when there wasn't much time left, and they'll be like, "Man, what was it all for? Did I really stop and, quote unquote, smell the roses?" So that kind of got me thinking back in the day. And I said, well, what is my version of enough? So I want to smell the roses. I don't want to be here in my studio, by the way, where 20 feet that way is a stunning panoramic view of the Caribbean Ocean. It's a 82-degree day right now. There's like 7 colors of blue in the Caribbean, like going out to Vieques Island, which is this gorgeous island that I can just see, right from my kitchen terrace. And, my son's probably swimming in that pool right now. And yet, so I said, am I going to spend 12 hours a day in this little dark cave and then go out and it's already dark outside? Or am I going to spend 3 hours in this cave because A, I do enjoy it because I like being relevant and actually talking to a brilliant human like Abel instead of a 11-year-old, boy that's still trying to figure things out in this world. But where's the balance? And like, what's enough so I can do this as much as I want? So I can do this enough and I can do that enough, because that would get boring too. Just sitting by my pool all day, I'd be bored out of my mind as well. Like you need to find what is enough for you on every level of your life. What's enough exercise? Are you trying to have a ripped 8-pack at 44 years old? I'm not. Like I'm happy, having, 15% body fat, but still enjoying a Haagen-Dazs ice cream every now and then as well. So like, what is your enough in these different areas? And I got there, and it's constantly being tweaked and adjusting. And sometimes something's going to completely change and I'll have to re-identify and reestablish it, but that's life as well. And then we proceed.
Get to your goal and stop, you've said before, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. It's somehow still unpopular. I'm curious though, after doing over 4,000 of these interviews, how often are you surprised these days? Is it constant still, or are you hearing similar stories that entrepreneurs are facing?
I would say I'm rarely surprised because of how many that I've done. And I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way. I think it just shows you that like history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does, rhyme. And there's so many similarities. And that's why in my book that you've referenced a few times, The Common Path to Uncommon Success, it's a 17-step roadmap to financial freedom and fulfillment. That's what that book is. And those 17 steps, they're not my 17 steps. They are a just combination of, at that time, I interviewed about 3,500 people, of those individuals that I interviewed over a decade at that point, now 12 years, now over 4,000 guests. But, that was knowledge from them. Those were learnings from them. And there were so many similarities. And I was seeing that, man, like there's very few surprises on a person's path to success when you're looking backwards over it, because you can see why they were successful there. Of course, everything's easier in hindsight, just like, being the Monday morning quarterback of like, well, of course, whatever should have happened. Like that's so obvious. And it's like that in business and entrepreneurship. So very few surprises, but I honestly think that's a good thing. And every now and then I'll get surprised and it'll be something fun and new and enjoyable, and that'll be cool. But that's a rarity.
Uh, what about how technology and podcasting and the media landscape has evolved in the past few years? We predate the word influencer, the creative economy or creator economy, that whole thing. At the beginning, it was quite technical, right? Whether you had an audio podcast or incorporated video, there was a lot of coding that needed to happen, and it was different back then. Now it's everyone is familiar with what podcasting is. That certainly wasn't the case when you got started. So how have you reacted to some of these changes? How has your own workflow maybe evolved? What has surprised you over the years of podcasting, and what's coming next in your mind?
I'm a big believer in focus, like follow one course until success. I believe my biggest reason for success is because I blocked out the noise for the past 12 years, and I've just kept doing what I do, which is produce the best possible daily podcast, interviewing the world's most successful entrepreneurs, literally 7 days a week, 365 per year. That's my focus. I will say it's 2024, and man, we are on the precipice of change. AI is getting crazy. Anybody that's checked out ChatGPT, Midjourney, Notebook LM, I mean, I could go on and on because they're just coming out every single day. You're seeing the absolute insanity that is happening right now in this world when it comes to video and voice and, fill in the blank. And so, listen, we right now are on the precipice of change. It might take a year. It might take 6 months. It might take 3 to 5 years. Like, who knows? But I can smell the change coming, and what that means for Entrepreneurs on Fire, I don't exactly know. But I do know that I've never felt this way in the past 12 years. I've always been like, hey, there's going to be competition. People are going to come in. They're going to try this and try that, but I'm going to focus on my thing. AI is real, and it's going to disrupt a lot of things. It's going to bring a lot of great things to the world. It's going to bring a lot of disruption to the world, which can be both good and bad. So we'll see what happens. But man, I'm keeping my finger on that pulse. I can tell you that.
For sure. Yeah. In the world of podcasting, what are you seeing AI do so far, and what do you think its potential is?
So you right now have to have skills as a speaker, as a communicator, as a facilitator of a conversation. I mean, you've done this a ton of times, presented from stage, on this stage right here that we have, on other people's shows, on your shows. Like, you've developed a skill set. You are good at what you do. I'm good at what I do. There's other podcast hosts and speakers that are good at what they do. And there's a lot of people that aren't willing to put in the work that we put in to get good at what they do. So there'll never be competition. But now there's an opportunity for those people who would never put in the work to do what we do to become good, that can just copy and paste some text, upload it to notebook.lm, then all of a sudden have a podcast episode with this co-hosting. I don't know if you've even heard that, but it's crazy how like natural that it sounds.
Yeah, I'll tell you in a second. Funny story.
Really nuts. And now that person who's, a 12-year-old introvert or an 87-year-old, human who's lost their voice but still has their functionalities, can now be competing with us and be, doing these things that could be really interesting. And at the very least, it's going to really saturate an already saturated market even more, which is more content, more this, more that. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, listen, change is good usually. So I'm kind of just keep my finger on the pulse, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah. So like Notebook LM, I was familiar with Chat GPT and Claude and a bunch of the other ones I goofed around with a little bit, but I kept getting these messages like a couple of months ago, and people are just like, dude, you need to check out Notebook LM because I think they're using your voice, or they used your voice to like train it so basically, quick overview of what it is, from my understanding, is Notebook LM. Basically, you could put in a paragraph or an article or some sort of input, and based upon that, or some marketing spin, whatever, based upon that, it will generate a simulated podcast conversation between the ones that I've heard are a male host and a female host kind of go.
Yeah. And those are really the two voices they have now.
Yeah. And so like people kept sending me these things. They're just like, are you working with Google or something? Because like Google's using your voice. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. And then I actually went in and listened, and it was like befuddling and deeply disturbing. At least the clips.
It sounds like you.
It's the clips that I heard were like me.
Wow.
80% me, and then it would like morph into an NPR voice sometimes, then it would morph into something else. But it's like certain things that I use. I'm sure you're familiar with what it's like to listen to your own voice, and it can be an unpleasant experience. It can be fine, whatever. But it is different than listening to someone else's voice. And when I heard this, I was like, whoa, there was like, it was a head shaking moment. Like this is very strange, especially because it was saying words that like I might use or kind of use in inflections similar to the way that I would speak on a podcast. But what it was saying was stuff that I would never even approach, because you can make it say essentially anything.
Yeah.
So to me, it made me think of, for you, for example, like building up Entrepreneurs on Fire, as well as your own personal brand. You have been doing great work for many, many years. Thousands, millions of people ultimately listen to you, are affected by it. And you've built trust with them by them listening to your voice over years. And you've delivered on those promises. You've said things that are like, I don't know if that's true. They look into it. It's true. You've delivered on those promises. So trust was built. And what's happening now is now you can like simulate voices that sound, it might not sound exactly like the person, but kind of like subconsciously. That trust that was built in those types of voices is now not something that you can trust anymore, right? So like we have access to all the information in the world, but you don't know if any of it is true anymore. So that's a really dangerous place to be in the information economy, media landscape, however you want to describe it. But the future, as far as that is concerned, is a little bit troubling, or at least we're going to need to get a handle on it. And in the meantime, I think we need to double down on the real human relationships, being in the same room together, taking some of these conversations offline even. I'm encouraged by the fact that I think a lot of people will be going in that direction and really hanging out, doing great work together again, because the promise of being able to work virtually is great. But as soon as trust is in question, it gets a little bit hairy.
It used to be a world where you would trust and then verify, especially if it was people that you already kind of had trust for.
Mm-hmm.
But now for everything, it's got to be verify and then trust.
Yeah.
Because to your point, I mean, like anybody can take my audio clips, your audio clips, anybody's audio clips, and they can essentially make us say close to anything that sounds so much like us, tonality, diction, like, everything. And that's scary. So like, this is kind of like a little warning to families out there, is like have a special like secret word that only your kids know, that only your family knows, so that if they ever get a phone call one day and it sounds identical to the person on the other line, even if it's a FaceTime, because the video is insane now, you have to be able to look at that FaceTime and say, what is our family secret word? And then of course the AI can't say that if you've kept it truly secret. And then that's the only way that you can kind of figure out for sure that it's not who they say it is, or that you can verify that it is who they're claiming they are. So it's pretty crazy. And, again, all you can do is kind of try to stay educated, in my opinion. And so I watch some great YouTube shows, like Matt Wolf has a great YouTube channel on artificial intelligence, on AI, where he really kind of unveils the latest and greatest and where things are trending and going, and try to stay educated. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, would you ever consider, and I've battled with this too, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't do this, but who knows what the future holds. If you could just basically have the AI of JLD run Entrepreneurs on Fire for you and interview guests or something like that, would you do it?
Here's the problem. Yeah. So I literally build my whole philosophy around business, the advice that I give, around one main phrase. Well, a couple main phrases. That book, The Common Path to Uncommon Success, can be summed up in one sentence. It's a fantastic book all the way through, so read the whole thing, but it can be summed up in one sentence. Become the number one solution to a real problem. If you can look in the mirror and honestly say that you are doing that you're the number one solution to a real problem, you will win, because people will beat a path to your doorstep for the number one solution to their problem. And if you're not able to do that, it's probably because you're not niche enough. You've got to find a niche that's being ignored, that's not being served well, and then you make that happen. So that is a very critical component to think about when you're going through a process of like building a business. The thing that, to your question of like, would I have AI run entrepreneurs on fire? Here's a problem with that. I'm a big believer in this second phrase: the higher the barrier, the lower the competition.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why Entrepreneurs on Fire's been a top business podcast, making millions of dollars a year for 12 years now, and counting, is because I've created such a high barrier of entry that I don't have any competition. When I launched, I was the only daily podcast interviewing the world's most successful entrepreneurs. Today, I'm the only daily business podcast in the world interviewing entrepreneurs 7 days a week. Nobody's doing it. Yeah. It's such a hard replication. The barrier to entry is so high that if you started today, good, you're 4,491 episodes ago, and probably your skills are a lot lower than mine. So who's really going to choose your show over mine? And a lot of people have had that conversation with themselves, and so they haven't. And so that was the niche that I carved out. Like, you've carved out a niche. I've carved out a niche. Lewis House, Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield, Jamie Masters, like all of the people that were working hard in that time frame of 2010, 2012, 2014, like we carved out niches and we worked hard at defending those niches, of keeping that moat around our business. If you hand something over to AI, then what are you doing that somebody else can't do the exact same thing of? Like, oh yeah, I could say like, that's my voice, I'd license that. What am I going to do? Am I going to sue somebody that has $0? I mean, am I going to spend my time suing 1 million people that try this, that all have $0, and all like, I have to pay a lawyer this whole time? I mean, and waste all of my time. So you've got to just think like, what and where do I fit going forward in this new world? And that's a question we're all going to have to grapple with.
It's so bizarre because we're already kind of at the point where we have AI writing the posts and then AI responding to the posts, and all people are doing are just like deciding to press send or not, or copy paste, whatever it is. So it's like,
and then they're gonna trust the AI enough when they're not even going to be checking on that thing. And then that thing came out that you might have seen where you can create this avatar that's identical to yourself, that looks like you on video, has movements, has like little minor twicks, like ticks and stuff like that. And then you can just be like on 17 or 100 simultaneous Zoom calls where you're present. Like you're not actually present, but they probably have like something where like, if you actually get addressed in that Zoom call, probably like a little red flag pops up and you can jump over there real quick and like say, oh, I'm sorry, you broke up. Like, what did you say right there? I mean, it's insane.
It is. And I'm not sure exactly what we do with that, but I had a really fascinating discussion with a storyteller of the bardic tradition named Odds Bodkin, who is like one of my child heroes. Actually, you may have seen him in Maine when you were a kid as well. Does that ring a bell?
Fantastic. Well, his name's so awesome that I would have remembered it.
Yeah.
What's something that he's created?
So anyway, he's been performing and writing stories as a bard would have hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. So Thomas of the Iliad, things like that. He'll play with a 12-string guitar and a harp. Anyway, I saw him a bunch when I was a kid, and just like floored because all of the performance was him. It was just that dude singing, doing all of the voices, writing everything. I asked him, how long does it take you to write some of these stories? And he said, well, usually around 2 years a piece. But one of them has taken 20, and he's been doing this for over 40 years. And so we had a really fascinating conversation about AI. And I'm just like, well, if AI could write a story for you in a couple of minutes, or a song that you could sing, what would your thinking be around that? Would you ever approach that? How would you consider all of this? And he's just basically, nope. This is very, very dangerous, because if you're a kid growing up in school and AI is writing all your term papers, what exactly are you doing? What are you learning? You're only cheating yourself. And so if you're kind of singing AI's song instead of putting in the work, learning the craft of how to channel ideas or channel something higher than you are maybe, and build it into something that can affect other people. If you're skipping that part, then what exactly are you doing here, and how fulfilling will that be looking back on your life? I don't have the answer to that. I would imagine that people who are coming up after us and a little bit younger will be much more open to these ideas, because ethics and morality and the way things are, that's also a moving target. And I don't think any of us can really come from a place of judgment saying our way is right and the other way is wrong. But I can say that this has my attention, and it's worth like trying to reckon with this. Like, what do we do as humans to make sure that we retain our humanity in the face of this technology that really puts some of that at risk?
I think you did nail it, where our generation and above are going to, just be those old curmudgeons.
Right.
And the younger generations are going to be like, what are you talking about? This is all that I know. This is how things are now. Like, this is what I'm embracing. So we'll see.
What about the world that your children are going to grow up with, or grow up in? What I would imagine having, starting your family in the past year kind of reframes the whole future. So what's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me is really, this world is now changing so fast and evolving so fast that I really just want to be in the present moment, and I want to try to make the right decisions today and what the next 3 months may play out with. But then when you have like an 11-month-old, they're changing so much. And then when the world's also changing so much, like, I think it could be just wasted time, energy, and effort to be thinking too far ahead for those reasons. So being in the present, making the right decisions based off of all the information that I have today, continuing to learn and educate myself, and keep my finger on the pulse of everybody involved, myself, my son, my wife, those around me, and then just kind of continuing to wake up and try to make that right decision.
What drives you as far as the commitment to podcasting goes and interviewing entrepreneurs and all that? The idea of enough from a financial or business standpoint is something that we've kind of covered on a little bit, but I'm curious, like, in terms of the future of how you interact with people, interview people, and the rate of that. Is this something that you plan to kind of keep going with for another 10, 20, 50 years, whatever it is? Or are you kind of open to, because there's so much change happening right now and the rate of change is increasing also, is it something where you're going to kind of keep going in this direction, or are you open to other directions as well?
I'd say honestly both. Like, I love what I'm doing right now, and I just don't see a foreseeable future where I'm going to want to adjust or shift what I'm doing, because to me, having amazing conversations with inspiring and brilliant people is great for me, and it's proven to be great for my listeners. And to kind of answer your initial question, like, what really gets me going with what I do, it's the ripple effect. It's knowing that a conversation that I'm having on my podcast with a person is hitting somebody right now at the right place, at the right time, with the right information. And they may be on a chairlift in the Swiss Alps, or they may be biking in Bryce Canyon, or they may be surfing with waterproof earbuds in Hawaii, but they're consuming the content. It's giving them an aha moment. They're doing something that they might not otherwise have done, and it's changing their life. And that's what excites me. And that's why I love continuing to put out this type of content, because I personally love the content and I love consuming it and having the interactions with the guests that I have on the show. But I also love the possibilities that it brings to the listeners.
If you had zero commitments right now, and pretend you're not John Lee Dumas for a second, but you do have your knowledge, if you were starting up a business or two, 2024, what would that look like with ultimate free time?
Man, that would be probably a question I have to sit down and think about, because there's very few things that I am passionate about hobby-wise. And I have a friend who's the opposite, by the way. He's a fantastic pickleball player. He's a drummer extraordinaire. He loves watches. He restores Porsches. He's an audiophile. He knows all the great audio. He has too many passions, if we're being honest. And it's kind of keeping him from having one big success. I'm on the other side of the equation, which is also a bad thing in my opinion, which is having almost no passions. So that was one reason why I was pretty excited to start a family, because I'm like, well, I don't, I'm not going to look at my son as like keeping me off the golf course, because I don't even like golf or X or Y or Z. I will say I am starting a cornhole league down here in Palmas.
Okay.
So, yeah, I own the lot next to me, so I'm leveling it out, and I'm going to have lights, and it's going to be a fun time. But by the way, we might talk in a year, and I might be like, yeah, I'm kind of bored with that, and Or it might be something that I really enjoy doing because I've always enjoyed the game passively, but I've never been that good. And I want to become really good to see if that kind of ups my level. Like I wasn't passionate about the art of podcasting when I started because I was bad at podcasting. But as I became good, I fell in love with the art of podcasting, of interviewing, of speaking, of presenting, of facilitating conversations. So that is where passion can bloom as you become better at something. So, at the end of the day, focus on the family, focus on the podcast, on the business, play a little cornhole, and have some fun.
Anything else from a health perspective that has really changed your trajectory or affected you or been a surprise over the years?
I've been working with a functional medicine doctor for 9 years now, Dr. Stephen Cabral. Brilliant. He has a great podcast called The Cabral Concept. Every really 12 months at a minimum, sometimes every 6 months, depending on how the last number of tests went. I'll take the big 5 tests and it's blood test, urine, stool, hair, and send it on in, get a full report of like a snapshot of my body, where I'm deficient, where I need to, some things I may need to work on or X, Y, or Z. And then we'll come up with a plan for the next 6 to 12 months. And like I've continued to do that. In fact, I've got the tests on my desk right over here to my left that I need to do for 2025 here to kind of get kicked off in the right direction. So to me, that's really important, is to have somebody who knows you, who knows your body, that's you are continuing to check in with and take tests with, and looking to dial things in that you may be struggling with, because sometimes it's just a little flip of a switch, like you're getting no magnesium, and like start taking magnesium supplements, and like you're a new person. Like that's a random example, but like that's been the big thing for me. Health and wellness is like eat clean, eat healthy, but at the same time, like again, I'm not trying to be Mr. Universe, so I'm not gonna deprive myself of a very enjoyable treat here and there, but stay active physically, eat healthy, and then continue to do the things with a functional medicine doctor excuse me, to make sure that I'm continuing to make sure my body has the right minerals, nutrients, vitamins that it needs to thrive. I mean, I'm 44 years old. I mean, look at me. I mean, I look fantastic.
I can vouch. I can vouch. Real quickly, I would love to ask you as well about taking that leap. As an American who basically spent your life here, moving to Puerto Rico, as well as other entrepreneurs, who kind of jumped the ship, moved somewhere unexpected. A lot of people in your family or friend group or coworkers, whatever it is, say, wouldn't it be nice? But you could never do that. I could never do that. Never going to happen. You actually did it. So maybe you could just quickly share about, and I assume you would say that it's worth it, based upon following your work and the conversations we've had in your book, of course. But I'm not going to put words in your mouth. What was that experience like? And what words would you offer to other people who might be considering that sort of idea?
Yeah, we moved here 8 years ago from San Diego. We went from working for the government for 60% of the year, basically until July, to only working for the government until January 14th, because we're only paying 4% total tax. So that was a fun shift that we made. And the great thing about Puerto Rico, it's a U.S. territory. Everybody here is an American. There's a lot of American culture here. There's Costco, there's Home Depot, there's Walmart, there's different things. But don't get me wrong, this is the Caribbean. This is a Latino culture. This is a heavily Spanish influenced culture, which is amazing because the Puerto Ricans are such a warm, kind-hearted, great people, welcoming. Like we've loved living amongst, Boricuas, as they're called, which are native-born Puerto Ricans. And then, of course, a lot of incredible, successful entrepreneurs have moved down here as well that we've gotten to meet too, because they've wanted to take advantage of the same opportunities. Living in the Caribbean, paying a flat 4% tax, paying 0% capital gains on all of our Bitcoin and real estate and stock earnings. I mean, it's generational wealth building right in front of our eyes. So it's been really exciting. We came down here saying, hey, it's 2016. We're going to try it for a year. If it doesn't work, we're going back to San Diego and we're going to suck it up and pay the taxes, because, that's our favorite place in the States by a long shot. And there's really very few other places that we would live long term. So we came here and we found our dream home, which we're still in to this day. And now we started a family. We've really started a life down here, and we have great friends, a great community, and great business benefits. And it's just hard to imagine leaving something like this. But I say that at the drop of a hat, if a health issue comes up or something happens education wise for whatever it might be, we're out of here. And that's the great thing about an entrepreneur is you can make decisions like that on the fly for what's best for you right now. And what's been best for us in the moment for the past 8+ years is Puerto Rico, and we love it.
Good on you, man. Thank you so much for your example, and thank you for the work you do in the world. What is the best place for folks to find your book, your podcast, and everything that's coming next?
Well, if people are kind of interested about what I just talked about, I do have a blog post that goes into a lot of details. So they can just check out eofire.com/YPR, meaning WHY, like Y Puerto Rico, YPR. So that's a great blog post we have with all the reasons and benefits of Puerto Rico, as well as the cons, by the way, because there's pros and cons to everywhere you live in this world. And that's just a reality. If you want to check out my book, uncommonsuccessbook.com. My website is eofire.com, and the podcast is Entrepreneurs on Fire.
Dude, John, you rock. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today.
Loved it, brother.
Hey, Abel here one more time. And if you believe in our mission to create a world where health is the norm, not sickness, here are a few things you can do to help keep this show coming your way. Click like, subscribe, and leave a quick review wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You can also subscribe to my new Substack channel for an ad-free version of this show in video and audio. That's at abeljames.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter or X, YouTube, as well as Fountain FM, where you can leave a little crypto in the tip jar. And if you can think of someone you care about who might learn from or enjoy this show, please take a quick moment to share it with them. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.